Hi Hermits, welcome back to my channel. My name is Dara and today I'm going to be sharing a bit of a run through of all of the books that I read in May. Now, after a couple of very slumpy reading months, I feel like I've definitely found my groove again this month. So I managed to read a total of 15 books, which is slightly more than my average. Usually I'm around about like the 10 to 12 mark. So I feel like I've done a pretty good job. Now, in terms of goals, one of the things that I said to myself at the start of the month is that I wanted to read at least 50% of my books by like Asian or Pacific Islander authors. So if you saw my Asian Heritage Month TBR, you will see some of the things that I was really trying to prioritize this month. And now let's move in to what I actually managed to get to, and you can see how successful I was with that intention, or not, as the case may be. So the first book that I read in the month of May was Soft Science by Franny Choi, and this was a slim volume of poetry that had like a queer feminist sci-fi twist to it. And I will be honest, my favorite thing about this book was the cover. I think it has a beautiful front cover, but like just writing wise, it wasn't really for me. And I think that I'm really learning what I particularly enjoy in poetry, and this just wasn't it. So I felt like this was it was like creative poetry, it was quirky poetry, and I think I'm just a bit of a basic bitch when it comes to poetry. I like things to be meaningful to me, relatable to me. I like them to be more emotional than conceptual, and so for that reason it just didn't quite tick my boxes. Having said that, it's like objectively, I don't think the poetry was bad. It just wasn't the kind of thing that I personally enjoy reading. The next book I read in the month of May was a collection of short stories called Home Remedies by Xuan Juliana Yang. And again, I feel like I'm really learning what I love in short stories, and this wasn't quite it. So I like my short stories to feel very complete. I want them to feel like a novel, but briefer. And like this collection didn't really do that for me. So I always felt there was sort of this like sense of ambiguity about the ending, and there was this sense of unease that was created by the narrative that never quite got concluded. I did do a vlog where I talked about that book in a lot more detail, so definitely check that out if you're interested. I'll link to it in the description, but it just wasn't my favourite. And I think because I'd so recently read The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, which I'd absolutely adored, I was kind of comparing the two, which probably wasn't fair, but I didn't like Home Remedies quite as much. There were a couple of stories that I did vibe with, but for the most part, I just don't think they were really my flavour of short story. Still good, I could still appreciate the writing, but just not written for me. Then I also read Sunny by Suk Ojla, and this was a stunning book. I had such a good time reading this one, and it actually wasn't on my AAPI TBR list, but it does still fulfill the prompt because it's written by an Indian author, and I loved it. It was like if you take Queenie and make it Asian, like that's how I would describe this book. But we are looking at a woman in her 30s who has had to leave her flat in London and move back home with her family, who are very strict and very traditional and very set in their ways. And she's really trying to navigate this line of living a Western life in a very like traditional Indian household and not having the two overlap. So she, like, her parents want her to marry a nice Indian boy, and she wants to just like have a nice white boyfriend, and all the while really navigating some quite toxic relationships in her life, romantic and otherwise, and dealing with racism and dealing with her mental health. And it's just stunning. And what I loved about it is that it was so deeply relatable. It was so touching and so moving, and it wasn't positioned around a romance. Like the point of the book was not for her to get a boyfriend and live happily ever after. Like the point of the book was her becoming like a happy, functional human being. and I thought that it did it really, really well. I feel like it's Bridget Jones for the 2020s. I really, really like highly recommend it. I haven't seen anybody else mention it, but I had a lot of fun. And like I said, it's very similar to Queenie. So it deals with a lot of very similar themes and issues. So you see a lot of like fetishization, you see tokenism, you see some white saviorism, you see just some like gaslighting and things like that, which aren't necessarily nice topics to talk about. But I think when they're like featured in fiction in a sensitive way, then they can teach you a lot and they can create this different sense of understanding than just explaining to people why you should and shouldn't do certain things, if that makes sense. All in all, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was brilliant and I will be recommending it more and more. I also read One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was a really quick read for me and it was another library book. And I mean, I enjoyed it. I read it really quickly. I definitely had some issues with it. Where should I start with this? So if you're familiar with it, you probably are. I think people talk about this one quite a lot on YouTube. But essentially we have our central character whose name I can't remember right now, but her husband is in a helicopter crash and dies. As far as we know, he dies. Fast forward a few years and she's sort of like put together her life again and she's now engaged to somebody else, and she receives a phone call letting her know that actually her husband is not dead at all. And then he obviously comes back into her life and she has to decide, like, is he the person she wants to be with or is it the new guy that she wants to be with, and everything that entails. And I think that I would have probably been more gripped by it if it wasn't so abundantly clear to me which person she was meant to be with. Like, I thought one of the men in this little love triangle was absolute trash and I couldn't stand him. I literally could not stand him. So I was really rooting for the other one, and I was certain the whole way through that the one I liked was going to win. And yeah, so for that reason, it wasn't the highest scoring TJR that I've ever read. I just think to make it extra hard hitting, she could have been a bit more subtle. Like, it's very clear which one she's supposed to be with. Like, it was very, very clear. But I think if it had been a bit more subtle, if they'd have, you know, if she'd have made it a real possibility for her to end up with the other guy, then I don't know, I think it would have just hit in a different way. I think it would have been more emotional, but it just didn't do it for me in terms of the emotion. Like, in terms of just an enjoyable read, like, it was fine, it was good. And then I read one of Minty Collins' Amazon shorts that she's done. So it's a series of essays, I believe, and this one was called Kind of Hindu. And it was really about her relationship with Hinduism and how she was never particularly interested until she had a child, and then suddenly felt like it was her responsibility to bring some of that culture into her own child's life. And it was fun, but like, I don't know if it's just me and essays. I always want more. It didn't feel like this was a complete book. It felt like it was a chapter from a memoir. And yeah, for that reason, it didn't give me the 5-star feels, but I did enjoy the writing style and I will read more by her in the future. Then I read The Tiger Mom's Tale by Lynn Lout Butler. This was another one that came up in the vlog that I mentioned. So the vlog with books by Asian authors, which I've linked to in the description. And I had a really good feeling about this one at the beginning. I really enjoyed the writing style. I really loved the premise, but it ended up being quite disappointing just because it did some things that I personally do not like in a book. And just to give you a really brief synopsis, this is about a young woman who is half American, half Taiwanese, and she doesn't really have a relationship with her Taiwanese family. And as the book goes on, you sort of you come to understand why that is. But as an adult, she receives an inheritance. So her dad passes away and she receives an inheritance, and she has to go back to Taiwan to deal with it and like deal with some family secrets and potentially like save the rest of the family from poverty. And just like the secrets that were unraveled and the way that the relationships played out in the family, and like some of the thoughts on family in general, like they just didn't feel good to me. I am not a person who believes that just because somebody is related to you, they get a free pass to behave however they want. I am all for cutting toxic people out of your life, whether you share DNA with them or not. So whenever a book is very much like, oh, but like they're related to you, so you have to forgive them, I'm like, no, hard pass. Like, I'm not buying into this bullshit. And so that was the overall like aftertaste that I was left with, so it wasn't a favourite. Then I read another one of the Amazon shorts. This time it was by Jade Chang and the book was named The List. And this one I didn't really like, so I found it quite dismissive and obnoxious, not two things that I'm looking for in a book. But essentially she's talking about a manifestation technique for attracting a partner that's known as The List. And the way that she speaks about it is so derisive and it's just condescending towards people who have certain beliefs, and that just doesn't feel good to me. I don't like dismissing anybody's spiritual beliefs, even if they don't necessarily align with my own. And I felt like that's all that was happening in that book. So I don't see myself picking up anything else written by this author, unfortunately. Then I read The Descendants by Cowie Hart Hemmings, and this was a real surprise for me. So I didn't think that I wasn't going to like it. Obviously I purchased it, so I thought I was going to enjoy it, but I didn't think I'd enjoy it this much. It's another one that I talked about in that vlog, but I really, really loved it. So this is about a man whose wife is in a coma, and he has to sort of deal with their kids, their home, all things that he never really had to deal with in the past because he is an attorney, he big workaholic, like he never really was in the house all that much. She was left to make all of the decisions. And now that she's in a coma and she's clearly not going to survive, he's like, shit, what do I do about our life? And so the story starts with him finding out this piece of news that she's not going to wake up. So he decides that he is going to go and let everybody know, like all of their friends, all of their family, that this is going to happen so that they can go and say goodbye. And in the process of doing that, he uncovers that she was actually having an affair and she was in love with another man. So along with his kids, he decides to like fly over to another island. This is set in Hawaii, by the way. Fly to another island to find the guy and let him know. And it's really about that journey, but also about his relationship with his own identity, his relationship with his kids. Because then in the background, there is this other storyline to do with his inheritance and his identity on the island. So in a nutshell, he is the descendant of the last Hawaiian princess who married I think an English merchant or some kind of European merchant. And him and all of his cousins own a lot of the island. And somebody is trying to buy it from them. In fact, a bunch of people are trying to buy it from them. And so he sort of has all of these big decisions to make about the land and the inheritance while also having to deal with his wife dying. I know that that sounds very, very grim, but it's told in such an amusing, wry way. Nobody in this book is a nice character, nobody. And yet there are people that you really, really root for. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's a book that I can definitely see myself reading again. And I feel like I haven't really been reading that many books recently that I would read again, but this is definitely one of them. The next book that I read in the month of May was a collection of poetry. It was Homebody by Rupi Kaur, and this one was lovely. I mean, I say it was lovely. Some of it was lovely, some of it was not lovely. Some of it dealt with some really difficult topics like race, immigration, sexual assault, different kind of abuses. That side of things, not so fun. But there were some poems in there that were so beautiful, so touching, just everything that I was in need of in that moment. I think the thing that was stopping this from being a favourite is because I wasn't expecting some of the topics that were handled in this collection. I was under the impression that it was going to be more about like self-image and the body and things and identity and things like that, which is what I was looking for. I didn't necessarily think that it was going to dive into some of the harder topics that it did. Not that I have issues with those topics discussed in literature, but you've got to be in the right kind of mindset for it, and I just wasn't at the time. So I think because of that, I didn't enjoy it as much as I could have. I might give it another go again in the future when I'm just in a different frame of mind and see if my feelings change. Then I read Skincare by Caroline Hirons. I'm not sure. She's a like skincare person, obviously. But this is one that I picked up from the library, and it's one that I've been wanting to read for a while, just because I've had such problems with my skin recently. And by recently, I mean for the past couple of years. I've really been dealing with some hormonal implications that have come out on my skin, and so I wanted to do a bit of research and figure out like how I could handle those, because it really does impact your confidence. It impacts your willingness to show up on camera, and when you have a YouTube channel, and also when you have to be very visible for your work, which I do, it takes its toll. So that's why I picked it up. I definitely learned some things from it. I didn't love that it was so product heavy. Like, I felt like there was a lot of product placement in the book and a lot of recommendations for specific products, and that's not really my jam. I was more looking for general like skincare tips, which I got some of, but I don't know, it wasn't amazing. Like, it was okay. There were things that I learned, but I didn't have all of my questions answered, unfortunately. And then we move on to the Bookoplathon books. So I took part in the 48-hour Bookoplathon. I didn't manage to read all 4 books that I wanted, but I did manage to get through 3 in a weekend. So I'm still celebrating myself for that. The first book that I read was Brown Girls by Daphne Pelosi Andreades, and I was really disappointed, I'm not gonna lie. I thought this was going to be another kind of Queenie-esque book, but set in New York, and it just wasn't. So I don't even know how to describe it. It didn't feel like a cohesive novel, that's for sure. It felt like a lot of very brief vignettes about a collection of women. But what was strange, what I couldn't get my head around was that, so it's told in first person plural, even though the character in each vignette is like one person. And so it's always like we and us, but you never know which one of the we and us is actually speaking. And all of these women are, like, we know they're brown girls, but they all have very different heritages. And so it was very difficult to string together the full story and actually feel for any of them, because it was almost creating this sense of distance between you and the characters portrayed. And I do think that was kind of the point. I feel like the author did a very creative job of creating a sense of like otherness and homogenization of like brown people. So from a like creative perspective, I can appreciate the work that was done. From an enjoyment perspective, it didn't quite hit it for me, unfortunately. But I don't know, I think it's going to be one of those ones that you either love or don't love. So maybe give it a go and see what you think. Then I read God's Behaving Badly by Marie Phillips, and now this was silly and it was fun and I enjoyed my time reading it. It's so imagine like the traditional Greek gods and goddesses are living in modern day London, essentially. Like, that's the premise of the book. So they're all still like a bit vengeful, a bit incestuous, a bit dodgy, but they're living in this like crumbling house in central London. Their powers are also fading, which they're not a fan of, and they're just like, they're having lots of fights, they're having lots of difficulties, and it's just about their time. And then these 2 mortals kind of accidentally get involved with this family of gods, and all kinds of hijinks ensue. It was a fun time, it was a silly book. I won't read it again, but I did enjoy it. And then the third book I read for Bookoplathon was House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland. I've had this on my Kindle for such a long time, and this book was, how would I describe it? all vibes, no substance. All vibes, no substance. Nothing really happens. Not really. But the vibes are strong. Like, I feel like it's a very aesthetic book. I think it would make a great adaptation, actually. But from a plot perspective, from a character perspective, it didn't quite hit the mark, because I didn't feel for anybody. I wasn't rooting for anybody, unfortunately. And it also really reminded me of another book. So the twist that took place really reminded me of something else. I'm not going to name it because obviously then it would be a spoiler. But I could see so many parallels that I kind of could see what was coming, which is unfortunate. But my thoughts are not very cohesive today. I'm really sorry. I'm not doing a great job of describing these books at all, but there's what I read. The next book I finished in the month of May was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. And this is an audio, I listened to it by audio, and it took me quite a while to get through, just because I've had, I don't know, probably about 6 weeks off from listening to any audiobooks at all. But it was a good time. I enjoyed it. It was a fun mystery. Did I guess who the murderer was? Yes. But there were some fun twists in there, and I really loved the characters, the way they were built out. The mystery was very well put together. It is the first in a trilogy, so I would definitely be interested in reading the others. Yeah, not too much more to say about that one, just I had a fun time reading it. The next book I read in the month of May was Where the Wild Cooks Go by Keris Matthews of Catatonia fame. I do love reading anything about food, whether that is like a novel, a poetry collection, or a cookbook. And this is a cookbook that combines recipes with sort of autobiographical essays, some cultural facts from around the world, and then also some poetry. And I thought that I was going to love it. Like, the cover is stunning. It's so striking. But it did leave something to be desired. I thought it was fairly basic. It's just, yeah, it didn't hit the mark for me. And I think potentially that's because I'm very confident in the kitchen, and like, food is nothing new to me. It just felt very superficial. And I also felt like the facts from around the world were very basic too. Like, if you'd have just looked at that country's Wikipedia page, I feel like you would have been able to pull out all of that information. So I don't know, it just didn't really do it for me, which is unfortunate. But one fun thing that she did include was a playlist per country. So you have a bunch of recipes from that country, and then you also have a playlist to listen to while you're cooking, which is kind of fun. But it's not the best cookbook that I've ever read. It's just not. The last book that I read in the month of May was Clock Dance by Anne Tyler. And I actually talked about this a lot because I filmed a cozy weekend reading vlog where I was reading this book. So I'm not going to go into it in too much detail because you'll see that vlog soon. But essentially it is about a woman whose identity was really shaped by 3 key events in her past. The first being her mother's disappearance, the second being when her husband proposed, and the third being when her husband died. And in each of those instances, her life took a different turn of events, but it wasn't one that was decided on by her. And that was really the theme for the first half of the book. So you see this woman who is sort of just going with the flow and letting other people determine her destiny. And then the second half of the book, she receives a phone call from one of her son's ex-girlfriends, or the neighbour of her son's ex-girlfriend, letting her know that the ex-girlfriend has been shot and can she come and help out with her kid and her dog. So she ends up spontaneously getting on a plane, flying across the country and going to hang out with this ex of her son, the ex's daughter and the ex's dog. And she starts like rediscovering herself, her purpose, what she really wants out of life. And it was giving me all the vibes. Like, I remember when I was reading this, I thought it was going to be like a 5-star all-time favourite, and it really had the potential to do that, but it took a bit of a lackluster turn towards the end, which was unfortunate. But like I said, I talk about it more in that vlog, so definitely go and check that out. when it's ready. It's not quite ready yet. But there you have it, all the books that I read in the month of May. I'm hoping that June is going to be just as prolific. It probably will be because June is my birthday month, and for my birthday month I always take a week off just to chill and usually read. So I'm anticipating getting through a lot of books. If you've read any of the books that I mentioned today, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Did you agree with my assessment? Do you want to challenge me? Let me know. I'm always open to discussion. But that is all from me right now. So I'm going to love you, leave you, let you get on with the rest of your day, and I will talk to you in the next upload.